Hey folks! This is part 1 of how I made a random junkbot for the game Bangarang, starting with random rolls to determine the flavor of the model, and taking a miniature from looking like this, to this, to this. We're gonna focus on how I put it together using stuff like styrene rods and tubes, spare bits, and green stuff, and hopefully show you a few conversion tips and spark some ideas. But first, what the heck is Bangarang? Bangarang is a tabletop miniature game simulating a gladiatorial fight between 2 or more junkbots. It's a small skirmish game with approachable rules and a heavy emphasis on scratch building and kit bashing your own cool robot to play. Its creator Bill Making Stuff has an amazing channel showing his creative bot builds, and the rules are free online. What really turns me on about this game is that it includes a junkbot generator, which is a way to give you randomized traits using a d20 to inspire you to create a cool new miniature. So my buddy Mike and I got together and rolled up some traits for ourselves to make our own sweet robots to play. The generator gives you 6 different categories for you to stick to: body, head, arms, hands, legs, and flavor. So what we ended up getting was spikes for the body, looking cool for the head, pistons for the arms, up yours for the hands, stumpy for the legs, and for the overall flavor we got rusty. We talked a little bit about different ideas that came to each of us, and almost immediately I kind of knew exactly what model I wanted to start with to do my kit bash. I looked around in my bits box and found some spare miniatures I had for a game called Relic Knights. So now that we've got the base model going, let's start some planning. Okay, we're gonna do some planning here. While we were rolling, Mike mentioned the idea of Johnny Bravo, and I couldn't help but latch onto that idea.
Immediately think Johnny Bravo. It's like this big bouffant hair.
It's kind of gonna be the inspiration for most of the build. For looking cool, we're definitely gonna be doing some sunglasses of some sort, make them look super cool. Throw those in there like Ray-Bans or something like that. We were talking about Johnny Bravo, so probably like some big old hair. So for the body to have spikes, I'm thinking something like shoulder spikes. I kind of don't want to go too crazy. Kind of like a metal jacket. Don't know how I'm gonna make those yet. Maybe I'll use some bits. He's already got some pretty stumpy legs. In fact, like the stumpy legs is what made me think of this model that I wanted to start work with. But in the spirit of Johnny Bravo, let's go ahead and give him some boots, you know? Which means I'll probably have to cut the feet off. Now, I don't think the legs posed currently is appropriate. I want to kind of make him stand a little upright, but I also want to keep that hunched over look. So I'm probably gonna cut off at the knee for this one and reposition him. Now we've got pistons for arms. Now I'm no mechanic, I don't quite know how they work or what they really should look like, but I'm kind of thinking of some sort of hydraulic like that goes into the elbow that helps him punch even harder. So I'm probably gonna put some tubes in here, maybe more than one. It might be a bit much with the spikes, so let's just do like one big one and see where that takes us. Now for the hands, we've got up yours. My first thought as soon as we were talking about stuff was a big old middle finger. I'm probably going to have to cut off this arm here so I can reposition it for fingers. And when we add the fingers, we're gonna definitely make sure that we have like a big old middle finger. Now for the other prompt being rusty, I was going to model this on with like some rusting stuff, but I think it's probably gonna be best for me to just paint on the rust. I think I wanna like lean into the looking cool part, because he's gonna need some sort of weapon. I want to give him some sort of like comb weapon, like a big old comb. It's looking like a saw, but you get the gist. I don't know if I'll make it out of plastic card or what, but some sort of, maybe a saw would work as a weapon and still look like a comb, but I know I want to give him some sort of big old basher, you know? And I also think of like, if he was in a fighting game, and his little wind taunt would be something with like the combing through his hair. Oh, I could have the pistons mimicking the ones that are already on his shoulders. Now he's still looking a lot like the base model, like what he started off as, so I think I'm gonna need to throw on something else that kind of changes the silhouette of the model. Probably something on his back to break up the the silhouette, or at least change the profile. And now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, well, you know, he doesn't really have a fuel source. I know I have some oil drum bits, so let's go ahead and add that. Yeah, let's add it to his back. Now, I don't want to just slap on an oil drum, because it doesn't feel like it's believable, so I'm thinking maybe connect with some hoses to, I can connect it to the weapon. So it's not only a fuel source, it's like a flamethrower. So that would mean I would need some way of like spraying it, then maybe some sort of nozzle to spray the fuel out. Maybe the sparks of the weapon also ignite whoever he's hitting, maybe himself. I mean, it's kind of risky. I think he's going to need some external way to regulate the flow of that oil, so like some on-off switch or like a valve or a wheel, a turning wheel. I could either put it, like if he were feasibly reaching, it could be his chest, but I think his right hand's gonna hold the weapon, so it'd be somewhere with his left hand. Maybe it'll be here. I feel like with the spikes it might get in the way. There's that big old hole in his back. Maybe that's where it goes. Kind of looks like a halo. That'd be pretty cool. Like, I'm gonna stick it there. That makes the most sense to me. Looking part rockabilly, part biker. I just thought of how motorcycles have those like cool rear view mirrors, like the rounded ones, and what about a front view mirror? So that instead of like just looking behind to see what's behind him, he's actually looking at what's like himself, like making sure that he's on point, you know? So yeah, I mean, somewhere like that, I think. So I just thought of it with his comb weapon and his front view mirror and where the little valve is. I just thought of his fighting game taunt being like he slicks his hair back with the comb and then he touches the wheel. Yeah, I think that's probably enough, or at least it hits all the prompts. But let's start the work and see where it takes us. I already broke the arm off camera because I got a little excited, but I really wanted to reposition it to see the best view possible to show that he's flipping the bird. Now I'm getting ready to use a hobby knife to score the leg where I want to cut it off at the knee. Makes it a little easier to clip it off. It doesn't make a clean cut, so I use the hobby knife to get it smooth. Since I planned on making some boots for his feet, I clip off his existing toesy woesies. The shin pieces are still a pretty cool shape, so I decide to keep the right leg one where it is and clean off the left. Now that I've got the pieces all cut off, I'm going to reposition the leg, so I start drilling where the knee is, and I cut off a little bit of the paper clip to create a pin. This is a process that I repeat quite often for this build. Overall, I'm pretty happy with the reposition. It makes him lose that jumping look and more like a heroic stance. I pretty much repeat the same steps for the arm reposition, using a drill and creating a pin from a paperclip and putting him in the spot that I feel fits best. Now, a good hand drill has been one of my favorite tools, and I highly suggest getting one if you plan on doing heavy conversion work. Overall, I'm pretty happy with the reposition. I take some styrene rods and I cut off a little slice. I want to use it to fill in the gap that's created by the reposition of the leg inside the knee. Now, I noticed that a full rod won't fit, so I cut off about a third out of it, and it fits the gap pretty perfectly and looks like a mechanical joint. I start to set some pins inside the shins for like the ankles and for the boots to connect, but I also make the pins a little longer so they can go through the base. I wanted to give him some mechanical ankle joints, so I did a pretty cool trick where I drilled holes into a hollow tube first and then I cut them, which makes it a lot easier to drill these holes rather than trying to drill it into a tiny piece. I fit the pins through the holes, which are lined up perfectly because I'd pre-drilled them, and you can see it makes a pretty cool mechanical joint. In order to hide the pin as well as make a more convincing joint, I used some smaller solid rods that fit inside the hollow portion, and I cut them to size and put them inside. I later realized that it's probably easier for me to cut them to size first rather than sticking this giant rod in there. I also used some clippers and some hobby knife to shave it down once it's inside to get an appropriate look. I kind of just want it to stick barely outside of the hollow tube, that way it looks more like a hinge. Now for the boots, I used some spare Space Marine shoulder pads I had lying around, which if you're a wargamer, you probably have some too. Now these mimic the shape of the toes of a boot pretty well, so I drill a hole through the top of the shoulder pad so that I can connect via a pin. Next, I drill a hole through those ankle joints we just made that are also connected to the pin through the shin. Then I pass a pin through the shoulder pad straight through to the ankle and clip it to size, gluing the pin to the ankle. Now, I didn't want just an exposed pin underneath the shoulder pad. Even if it's not seen, I feel like it would also help strengthen the pin. So I covered it with some hollow tube that I cut to size, and then I attached the shoulder pad to it, and it's looking like a pretty convincing boot. Now there's no soles on these boots, so I got some spare bits I have from a game called Tanks. It's a smaller scaled World War II miniature tanks game, and I wanted to cut off some tread that could kind of simulate cleats of a boot. So after about cutting 3 pieces for one boot, I trimmed them down to size to fit and arranged them onto the boot so that they made sense around the pipe. I had to clip them after gluing so that they were flush with the shoulder pad, and then I used a hobby knife to make that even more flush. Overall, I was pretty happy with this one. I kind of pulled this one out of my butt. I didn't really have a plan for these. I didn't even notice that when I was planning, I didn't plan on the bottom of a boot. Pretty much just repeat this process for the other boot. Now, when I was digging around my bits box, I noticed a pretty cool orc piece that could work for sunglasses. Originally, I planned on making these Ray-Ban style glasses out of plasticard, but once I saw this orc iron jaw thing, I turned it upside down and I realized, wow, that would actually work really well for some shades and fit more appropriately as like a junkbot's version of sunglasses. Sometimes we have little happy accidents. After having ripped off his left arm, I knew I needed to cover up that hole, and instead of plasticard on the same sprue that I got the iron jaw, I found this perfect piece that fit right over the hole, and it further emphasizes how kind of put together he is. I imagine it to be like a hatch to access the inside of his arm. And off of the same sprue, I saw some appropriate spikes and thought, well, may as well use them. So I clipped them off and figured they would fit pretty easily, but then I realized they weren't the same shape, so I'm gonna have to bend them with like a heat gun. This sprue ended up being pretty much gold because I found a few other bits, including a valve wheel that works perfectly for that halo bit that I had planned on the top of his back. Man, you gotta love orcs, because in the same bits box I found this orc helicopter guy, and the blades of the helicopter look like they work perfectly for the comb weapon. Now I don't have to make one out of plasticard, I just cut that little bit off and it looks just like a robot's version of a comb that both bashes you and stabs you. Now for a bit that I actually planned on, I have these jerry cans and oil drums from Tamaya, and I always like to keep a few of these around because they work for so many different purposes as both terrain and basing elements. These are pretty easy to put together, they're hollow so they're not heavy, and they come in both a distressed version and a clean version. Of course I picked the distressed one. Now to attach some of these bits to the model, I used a heat gun off camera onto these orky shoulder pads just to make sure that they can fit to the size of this model. I think these spiky orc bits work perfectly and give them a lot more of a punk rock vibe, which probably works really well with this rockabilly look that I'm gonna add. Now for the control valve wheel, I wanted to give it a little bit more elevation, so I got a hollow tube, cut off a little piece, and glued it right into that little hole in the back. In order for it to fit a little bit more snug, I drilled a hole and hollowed it out even more with a hobby knife, and then I attached the wheel and it was the perfect elevation. I wanted it to hover above his head like a halo. Johnny here has a halo because even though he's a bad boy, he's a boy that loves his mama. Now, with the oil drum, I just drilled 2 holes, put some glue there, throw in some pins, then drill 2 appropriate holes in his back, and glue that oil drum right to his back. This way it's more secure than just gluing him on. I feel like if I just glue it on, it's going to snap off. And just for a little more flavor, I glue on this orky lightning bolt to show that it's his go juice. I wanted to show that his go juice is going from the barrel to his body via some hoses, and I didn't want to just glue on the hoses, I wanted to have it a little more secure. So I drill a hole for some hollow styrene tubes, and then glue another hollow styrene tube to the oil drum. Then I cut an appropriate size of some solid rod and used a heat gun off camera to bend it. Once I snap that thing in there, you know she ain't going anywhere. Now I needed a solution to believably attach the oil drum to the body, and I'm pretty proud of this idea. I got some L-shaped bracket styrene sheets that I have that I never knew how I would use. I ended up using it here because I cut off some of these L shapes and made it attach to the oil drum as well as the body. And I did so on both sides, and after doing that, I cut some little round rivets from styrene rods and then attached them and made it look like it was a girder with some bolts in it. Now I didn't want to just have one hose attached to the body, I wanted to add another. And instead of putting it in the mirrored location on the back, I wanted to attach this one to the deltoid or the shoulder of the model. So I used the same tricks I did before with the hollow tubes, and this time I got a longer styrene rod and bent it with a heat gun and attached it from the shoulder to the oil drum. I ended up using a little more glue to keep it secure. Looking back, I kind of wish I drilled a hole for the styrene rod to fit in there, that way it would be more secure. Now I pretty much used the exact same tricks of the hose, except in an extended version for the weapon. I start by drilling out a hole to fit the solid styrene rod inside of the weapon, and then I cut a longer hollow tube to act as the hilt or the handle of the weapon, and stick the solid tube through the hollow tube, attaching it from the weapon to the oil drum. Again, I used a heat gun off camera to bend the styrene tube. I used a lot of glue to make sure it stays in the hand, and a lot of glue to make sure it stays attached to the oil drum. Again, I kind of wish I drilled a hole inside the oil drum to attach the styrene rod, but hindsight's 20/20 and I don't really care. Now, for the nozzle on his weapon that spews forth the same fuel onto his enemies, I got a bit from the same sprue for tanks, and I believe this is sort of like an exhaust pipe, but it looked like it worked perfectly for the weapon. Now I cut off a little bit of the exhaust pipe so that it looks more like a straight nozzle. And then I drill out a hole and carve it with a hobby knife so that it looks more like a nozzle. And now on to his front-facing mirror. I take a sponson piece from that same tank sprue. It's small enough and round enough it looks like a motorcycle rearview mirror. And I also get an orc banner sprue, mostly so I don't have to cut another styrene rod. I cut the banner down to size and I drill a hole. I shave off an angle so that it goes into the chest and appears to look straight. Then I drill a hole inside the chest that's the perfect size of the orc bit. And now I cut the sponson down to size and put it inside that drilled hole inside the orc bit. That way it looks like it's a front-facing mirror. Now on to the arm pistons. This is the one that I was dreading the most, even though I felt like I had the clearest plan for it. I drill a hole inside the elbow that's the perfect size of this small styrene rod that's solid. And now I get a bigger hollow tube that fits exactly the size of this solid rod and put it on the outside. Now I shave this off a little bit so that it's slightly shorter than the solid rod. And I also cut an angle to the other side so that it fits the elbow perfectly. Now it being shorter is going to help me in the sculpting phase so that I can mimic the pistons that are on his shoulders. And with that done, I actually cut another bigger hollow tube that fits perfectly around this so that it looks like the inner two tubes push inside of his elbow like a hydraulic would. While I'm cutting this, I shorten it down a little bit more so that the two inside tubes look a little bit more prominent. I also keep in mind that this shape kind of mimics the stripes on his forearm, so when I'm painting it, I'm going to remember that and paint it the same color. Now all you gotta do is repeat it for the other elbow. I'm pretty happy with just having these two. I feel like I might be doing a little bit too much by adding more, so I'm gonna keep it to one each. Now I feel like I needed to decorate him a little bit more, make him a little more punk rock, a little more metal, so I cut some slivers of some solid rod to imitate studs and put them on his toes, so that way his boots have little toe studs, and then I did the same things for his shoulder. Now for the dainty work, I'm going to start working on his fingers. I cut off some slivers of solid rod to act as his knuckles, and then I glue them onto the existing fingers to extend the digits. So I knew it would be a little bit frustrating, but I had no idea how frustrating and how dainty this work was going to be. Then I cut some more solid rods, a little bit longer, to act as his actual fingers, and carefully attach them with some tweezers. And we can't forget the middle finger, standing upright. Looks okay, it's not exactly what I was picturing. I did the same thing for the other hand, and that was pretty tedious. Now, I actually ended up redoing the fingers because I thought the first ones were too spindly, so I cut these ones shorter and reattached them onto the existing knuckles. They looked a little bit better, but I don't know, it's not exactly what I was thinking of. Oh, I forgot to put some studs on his other shoulder. Now he's a matching punk rocker. On to the basing elements. I wanted to work on this so I could work a little bit more on the boots. and I wanted to have a secure fit for him so that I can handle his feet. So I take some 3D printed rubble bits I had and another MicroArt Studio base. I love using these things. Drilled some holes in them, glued them on, and that way he's secure onto the base. And I glue all of that on top of a 40mm base, which is the suggested base size in the rules. Now that he's secure on the base, I can add more to his feet to make them look even more like boots. I feel like he was missing a heel to the boot, so I cut a hollow tube, and then I cut that tube in half and put them on like they were mud flaps. And I feel like I see that a lot in like mecha and stuff. I felt like the weapon needed a little bit more decoration on the handle, so I did the same trick of cutting a hollow tube in half to surround the handle of the weapon so that it looked a little cooler and had a better silhouette. And on top of the end of the handle here, I cut some more studs and attach them north, south, east, and west on the handle. That looks a lot cooler and a lot more appropriate to a junkyard warrior. Man, his fingers were really bugging me. I did not like the way they looked. So what I ended up doing was reworking those fingers again, and I figured I figured out what was bothering me was that they looked spindly, and it wasn't because of their length so much as it was that I think I was using the wrong size tube. So I ended up getting the bigger tubes, and I took my time cutting it and adding some additional angles to make them look more like fingers. And this time I cut all 3 fingers at the same time to make sure that they all were equal length. I then took off the old fingers and knuckles, and replaced them with the new and improved, stick it to the man, up yours, appropriately sized sausage fingers. This guy looks like he's really sticking it to the establishment. I'm also going to add some terrain elements by cutting off a little styrene rod here and adding it as if it's some debris or some rusted pipe that's underneath his foot, filling in that little gap. And then I also wanted to take some plastic card for another metal element. I'm going to take a sheet of some corrugated plastic card to put on top of it, and what I want to do is shape a bit of metal underneath where the sword is to make it look like the fuel coming out of the nozzle is melting the surroundings. Like something that it drips on is corroding the metal in some bright glowy way. I really think it's going to add some character and explain a bit of the story of how he uses this weapon, how he uses his go juice in a fight. So after cutting out the corrugated metal, I drill some holes inside of it to give it the impression that something's eating through it. Then I place it right underneath that weapon, close to where the nozzle would drip. Now on to the final bits where I take some green stuff to do some final sculpting of some of these details. Now I'm not super comfortable with green stuff, but I think I do an okay job. What I wanted to do was on these hydraulics, these pistons on his arms, I wanted to mimic the tapered off shape of the same ones on his shoulder. So I packed some green stuff around the smaller inner tube and shape it using my sculpting tool. I do the same thing to the other side. This was actually a lot more tedious than I show. It was actually super frustrating. I'm not great with green stuff. I also used some green stuff on his left arm to hide the joint that I drilled, and to make it look a little bit more appropriate as to that's where his arm comes out, because it doesn't actually come out that side. And if one were a stickler, they'd notice that his left arm is slightly longer than his right arm, but who cares? Now on to the defining piece, the green stuff sculpting of Johnny's hair. I saved this for last because I knew it would be a lot of tedious work, and I'm also not the biggest fan of sculpting, but I knew in order for me to land the look that I really wanted, this hair had to work. This hair had to be on point. So I took a long time sculpting this guy and basically put on one big blob for the hair and sculpted them into like banana shapes so that it looked like Johnny Bravo's hair. Now this is going to take more than one stage, so I let this part of the hair dry overnight. And then I got a smaller little sausage slash banana shape after it dried and put it on top of that so that it had a little separation of the shape from the original blob. Now this took a lot of work. It was very tedious, but at the end of the day, it was really worth it because I think it really completed the look. And I felt really brave afterwards and made an even tinier sausage to make like a small little bang in the front of his hair. Now, this one drove me nuts, but when all's said and done, it was really worth the look. Like, I love it. My favorite part. And that's the build. Now he's ready for some paint, so stick around for the next video where I show you how I did the paint job. I really appreciate you watching it. Make sure that you give a like, subscribe, comment what you liked, maybe some suggestions and some sculpting tips, and I'll see you all next time. Keep slinging paint, my friends.